Hey there everyone, and welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. Coming at you with my first Tarkov video in 1440p, now that I've got myself set up with a new rig and a new monitor to get some nice crisp footage. I thought it would be fitting for my first video with the new setup to go over what I would say are some of the best looking builds in all of Tarkov. With these builds, I was setting out to make the ultimate mix of function and fashion, going with some of my favorite setups to run when I want to immerse myself in Tarkov's gunsmith. First up, I've got one of, if not the best looking M4 builds in all of Tarkov, the URX two-tone build. A pretty solid M4 setup that adds some really amazing tan colored accents onto the rifle to make one of the most visually striking setups in the game. To start off, get a basic M4 and swap out your receiver for the VLTOR MUR-1S upper, then get a Raptor charging handle, the JP gas system 5B, and an SI advanced buffer tube. After adding these vital parts, I attached the KAC 3-pronged flash eliminator, and then the KAC QDC 556 suppressor. For the handguard, this is using the KAC URX 10.75-inch handguard, which can attach two of these tan rail covers to boost ergonomics and add a really unique look to the setup. Next, I grabbed the URX 3-inch rail and add a tan RVG foregrip. Then you can add whatever you want for a flashlight, but just for the fashion on this one, I went with the tan Balder Pro O-Light. For the sight, you can definitely swap out to whatever you prefer, but I went with the tan Geisley 30mm mount with a Voodoo 6x scope for my main sight. As a backup, I also added an MPR 45 mount with a Delta Point reflex sight as well. For the stock, I go with the standard MOE carbine stock with a rubber butt pad to match the rest of the build. Then for the pistol grip, I'm using the Hogue rubber grip to color match, but you can swap this out for something with better stats if you want. Finally, I just add a pair of MBUS iron sights and the build is complete. With this setup, I end up with 40 recoil and 57 ergonomics, which is a pretty solid M4 build all things considered, but you can get the recoil even lower by swapping out to the Saker suppressor if that's what you're looking for. You can also make this build with a shorter barrel as well and the shorter 8-inch version of the handguard, and I find it looks really awesome with the tan EOTech hollow sight when you set it up this way. Next up, we're going to take a look at a build that has kind of been left in the dust since 9mm AP ammo stopped being so plentiful, the MPX 14-inch Lancer build. This one, in my opinion, is just the ultimate 9mm build from a purely fashion standpoint, and one of the best in the game if you're looking to use a 9mm setup as well. It looks more like an assault rifle than an SMG, and that's why I love it. It almost transforms the MPX completely, which I think is pretty cool. To start off, you want to get an MPX and then replace the barrel with the extended 14-inch barrel, and then add the Lancer 14-inch OEM handguard. This handguard uses M-LOK rails, so get yourself a set of rails and then you can add on attachments. For my grip, I'm using the Fortis Shift foregrip, and then as a flashlight, I'm just using the Surefire XC1, which I think is one of the cooler looking options in the game. For your suppressor, you can run the Osprey 9mm suppressor for better stats, but personally, I think the SIG SRD 9mm suppressor just looks a lot better, so that's what I have on here. Then I add on the Graal S pistol grip to match up with the foregrip, and then the MPX buffer tube adapter as well. For the stock, I add the SI advanced buffer tube, and then I'm using the Chris DS150 stock on this build to give the MPX more of an assault rifle appearance. For my sight, I usually just run this with a hollow sight, but it can also work okay with the compact 2x scope. Finally, don't forget the 50-round MPX drum mag so those mag dumps don't empty this thing out immediately. With this setup, I end up with 27 recoil and about 45 ergonomics, which is pretty solid, and you can spray an entire 50-round mag without too much recoil if you build this thing this way. For the third build in this video, I want to check out my favorite SR25 build, which honestly is pretty close to being best in slot as well. The SR25 looks amazing pretty much all the time with any build, so this one is kind of cheating. But I really like this one because it has that classic quad rail AR appearance that we all fell in love with when video games first started introducing us to modding out guns. You could basically say that I went out of my way to make the SR25 look like an M4, and you know, I wouldn't say you're wrong. I just really like how this setup looks in first person, and the build has great stats, so it's also quite effective. First, swap out to the KAC muzzle brake kit, and then attach the KAC PRS QDC 762 suppressor. Next, swap the gas block out for the CMMG Mutant gas block to bring your recoil down by a few more points. After this, I add the Noveske SWS split handguard, which already has multiple rails for adding attachments. For my grip, I'm going with the SE5 Express foregrip for the extra ergonomics, as much as for the fashion points. And I also have the Steiner DBAL flashlight on here as well. Then I swap over to the Graal S pistol grip for the max ergonomics bonus, and I also add the SI advanced buffer tube to improve the overall stats. For the stock, I really do find that the PRS Gen 3 stock works so well to make a rifle look more like a DMR and a bit less like a bigger M4, so I like it a lot on this build. Plus, it has great recoil stats, so you can't really go wrong with this one. Finally, you'll just need a sight, and for this build, I almost always go with my favorite setup in the game, which just happens to also look amazing. A JP 30mm scope mount, the Voodoo 6x optic, and then a Delta Point reflex sight up top as a backup. When this build is all put together, I get 66 recoil and about 46 ergonomics. So the build is very much comparable to a true best-in-slot SR25 build. Next up on the list for this video is the RD704, which I honestly think is the best looking AK style rifle in Tarkov, and the fact that it's maybe the best gun in the game period is just kind of an added bonus. You can make some pretty sweet looking AK builds from the ground up on other rifles, but honestly the RD704 just has the most sleek, modernized look out of all of them, and that kind of wins out for me over the more chunky designs of a lot of other AKs when they're fully modded out. Plus, as a bit of a bonus, you don't need to swap out many parts on this build, so it's simple, beautiful, and extremely effective, which is a hard combination to beat. First up, I swap out the muzzle device to the Thunderbeast Ultra 5 suppressor mounted on the 30cb muzzle brake, which has some pretty solid stats, but also I think really works on this setup to keep it looking short and compact. Next, I add some M-lock rails to the handguard. Then I go for the Magpul RVG foregrip and a Surefire XC1 flashlight, both of which really fit with this build pretty well. For the dust cover, I add the Fab Defense PDC dust cover, which I think looks the most modern, and then for your sight, it really is up to you. On this setup, I have the Monstrum 2x scope, and then on the handguard, I have an MPR 45 mount with a Delta Point reflex sight as a backup for the 2x. I think this combo looks pretty nice, but it might not be the most effective, it just depends on your preference. Finally, I swap out the stock for the Archangel AK stock, which is one of the coolest attachments for the AKs, and I leave the Tango Down pistol grip on that comes with the RD704. When this setup is all put together, I end up with 55 recoil and about 60 ergonomics, which is a pretty solid setup for shooting 7.62 BP, and you'll have one of the nicest looking builds in the raid as well. Finally, to close out the video, I wanted to go with something a little different. I never really talk about bolt action setups in my videos, so I wanted to go over what I think is the nicest looking bolt action build in Tarkov, the All-Tan M700 Mod X build. For this one, if you've completed Jaeger's quest to kill Sturman with the 24x scope, you can basically buy it pre-built from Jaeger, but you can also build it from the ground up. Personally, I think this is the best looking bolt action sniper in Tarkov, even beating out the new AXMC, which is just a little bit too chonky for my tastes. First up, I add a Thunderbeast Ultra 5 suppressor on the 30cb muzzle brake, just because I think the short little suppressor gives a cool look to the overall setup. Next, you need to take off all the rest of your parts and start adding the Mod X chassis, starting with the Mod X stock, which is the base of the whole setup, then the Mod X key mod handguard, and finally the Mod X rail mount. With these three parts added, you're pretty much set to finish off the rest of the setup. First, I add a key mod rail to the handguard, and then I add a tan Magpul AFG foregrip to match the rest of the setup. You can also add the rangefinder to this build as well, but I don't have it on this one. For the scope, I have the tan Geisley 30mm scope mount on this setup, and then just purely for the fashion, I also went with the Schmidt & Bender 1:8 scope, which matches up so nicely with the rest of this build. However, I would probably recommend you swap over to the Voodoo scope or the Vortex Razor, because BSG doesn't seem to care about fixing the sensitivity issues on this 8x scope. Next, I add the SI advanced buffer tube onto the rifle for the ergonomics bonus, and then I'm running this with the Magpul CTR stock, which you can get on the flea market, and gets you some pretty nice ergonomic stats while matching with the rest of the build. Finally, I add the Hogue rubber pistol grip and then a pair of MBUS iron sights for the ergonomics bonus. With this setup and the 5-round Magpul mags for the ergonomics bonus, I end up with 52 ergonomics while suppressed, which I think is pretty solid for a bolt action setup that looks this nice. You can also improve the ergonomics as well by swapping to a different pistol grip if you don't really care too much about having that be tan like the rest of the build. Well, that pretty much covers it for these builds. what I would consider my 5 favorite setups in Tarkov purely from an aesthetic standpoint. Though honestly, I don't think any of these builds really sacrifice very much performance either. I hope you found this video interesting, and I'd love to know what all of you watching think are some of the nicest builds in Tarkov. Let me know if you have a favorite down in the comments. Let me know if you have a favorite down in the comments, and maybe I'll check it out. And who knows, maybe it'll even make it into a video. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got links to my Twitch stream, Discord server, and Patreon page down below for anyone interested. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.